In this, the third and final installment of my video build series, I'm going to turn this kit of parts into this, a scale replica of the historic Erie train station. Welcome back to Concordia, my mostly scratch-built layout loosely set in 1940s New England. It's based on the model railroading classic book, H.O. Railroad That Grows, except I'm building it in N gauge. As I highlighted in my previous two videos, I begin the process in Inkscape, the free online design software, applying textures to the parts that will become the outer walls of the station. With this build, I tried something new, applying weathering to the walls in the form of a pattern I found on textures.com, another free online resource. Although it looks pretty heavy here, as it turns out after it's actually printed and applied to the cardstock, it's pretty muted. And in future buildings, I think I'm going to try and go a little bit darker to show the actual weathering. But once I'm satisfied with the patterns as they're on the buildings, I print it out using the method I've previously mentioned of sending my files to the local office supply store using the Print Me service, since I don't own a printer. And in the meantime, I set about to cut out all the pieces of card. I used to do this by hand, but as I showed last time, I recently bought a Cricut die cutting machine, and it automates the process brilliantly, precisely cutting out all the pieces to the exact measurements needed. And then it's just a matter of cutting out the images that I've printed out and gluing them onto the correct card for assembly. I use regular Elmer's glue at full strength, and the precision glue applicator that I use makes it a simple task to go around the edges of the windows and doors without making a big mess of everything. I actually got them off of Amazon, and I'll leave a link in the description if you'd like to pick up a set for yourself, because they're a real help. I then carefully line up the exterior wall texture with the card and roll it with this dollar store roller that I picked up to ensure complete adhesion. Now I don't bother waiting for the glue to dry, because after just a few seconds the paper no longer shifts. And then I use my scalpel to make X's across the windows and door openings so I can then wrap the texture around the frame and leave no card edges exposed. Here I'm just using my tweezers to sharpen the fold over the edge of the card, just so that there's a nice crisp line there. Then it's just a matter of putting a drop of glue all over the edges of the paper so that it can stick to the back of the card. At the end, you're left with an exterior wall that has the doors and windows cut out of it. Speaking of the windows, with this build I try to do something different, and that is use this vinyl paper from Dollar Tree to cut out the window frames. As I think I mentioned in my last video, I wasn't really happy with the windows as I've cut them out. So this time, I thought I'd let the Cricut cut them out. And I gotta say, I'm super impressed with how detailed the frames are. The sashes of these windows are less than 0.5 millimeter, I'd say. Now what I'm doing here is called weeding, and you're basically just picking out the cut parts so that what's left behind is your window frame. Here I'm carefully pricking out the window frame from the vinyl. Now because it's a permanent vinyl, it's got a sticky back to it, so I can just press this right onto the acetate. And I forget, this is like a cake lid or something like that. You can just press it right onto the acetate and it'll stick and stay. So I go through and I attach several of these window frames to the acetate before cutting them out. But as you can see, because they're so fine, you got to be real careful that you don't pull too hard too fast, otherwise you'll obviously tear it. Using my scalpel and a steel rule, I cut out the windows, leaving a little bit of an edge around the frame so that I have a surface to glue onto and not have it actually cover up the window part, marring it, clouding it with the glue. And then this is the downspout section of my building. So I'm going to glue the frame to the downspout section, and then the exterior wall will be applied over the top of this. That way it sets the window back into the building, gives it a little depth. I do the same thing on the side walls, but because there's only one layer here, we don't have a downspout layer on the side walls, I actually glue it to the interior side of the side wall, and that way it still gives that 3D effect. And then that wall is glued into place on the side of the building. And what you're left with is a neat little model. The acetate blends in with the wall. You really don't see it on the inside of the walls. And the exterior, I think, looks pretty neat. Now, one thing you may be noticing on this exterior wall is the green trim that I've actually got on the buildings. And for that, I actually turned to the Cricut once again. I wasn't sure if this was really going to work, but I designed the layout in Inkscape for all the molding around the sides of the walls. Imported it into Cricut and let it cut it out to see if it would work. And while it's very fiddly to get everything lined up, it actually looks really good, I think. I think it did an excellent job of replicating the green trim all around. Now, once again, you got to be super careful when peeling this off of the vinyl backing. And as you can see, it's just very delicate, so you don't want to tear the vinyl. Now, in this image, you can see the trim that I cut out by hand with paper, and it was just not good. I didn't like it at all. So that's why I turned to the Cricut to see just how much of a better job it could do, and I think it's excellent. So there's just so much you can do with this Cricut, with this model railroad building, in designing your buildings. And it does have some limitations, like on the windows. I had tried to do a 6-light window, and that's 6 individual panes, and that was just way too small for the Cricut to cut out. It was tearing up the vinyl in cutting it out. So that's why I have a double hung window in there. I probably could have gone with a 4-light window, 2 at the top, 2 at the bottom. But I just decided to go with the double hung, and I think it looks just fine. At the end, we're left with this 3-sided box, and I didn't attach the 4th side just yet because I have to drill the holes for the Nano LEDs I'm going to be installing in the ticket office and in the waiting room. Feed it through the holes that I drilled in the ceilings, the walls, and the floor, so that they all come out of a common hole in the bottom of the building, and I don't have a whole bunch of holes coming out. So then it'll just be a matter of gluing the 2 buildings together. Here I've actually soldered on some leads to drop it down through the table, and I really need to get like 26 or 28 gauge wire, because as small as I thought this was, those big red and white wires were pretty big and pretty annoying. But as you can see, it actually lights up the rooms really well, and I think it'll look good on the table. So then it just comes down to sealing in the box, attaching the 4th wall, and success. Unfortunately, I didn't get any video of me making the roof, but it's pretty straightforward. I used Chanwell's no maths method of designing and building the roof, and then I just took sheets of texture, roofing tile texture, and applied it. In the past, I've actually cut the individual rows of tile and glued each one on, but I figured at normal end scale viewing distances, you're not going to tell, and I actually think that's correct, and I think it still looks okay. I think it came out fine. The real tricky part was putting on these little parts for the top of the roof, cutting them out. I did like 3 or 4 different attempts on the Cricut cutting them out. First couple were not successful. I finally was able to get some cut out, and just out of a 1/2 millimeter card, I glued them into place. What really helped was actually coating them in glue first and then painting them. The glue really stiffened them up nicely and allowed me to apply them with little trouble. You can also see I got a chimney on there, and that was just made up with several layers of card. My designs were a little too intricate initially, but the Cricut, when it cut it out, it took care of all those really small details that I keep trying to include. It looks bigger on the screen when I'm designing it as opposed to when I'm actually trying to cut it out. And here it is completed. A few more details were added, like the smokestack over the coal room, benches outside the waiting room, and the gutters along the roof line. I think it actually came out really nice. I'm really pleased with it. It's not perfect, of course. You can see in the eaves there of the gables some extra details that I put in that were cut out on the Cricut. Another challenge there. But overall, I think it looks good, and I think it's going to be a nice addition to the layout. Okay, thanks for watching.